Fate. Souls and Singularities by Mundatorem Chapter 71-72. Chapter 71. The fateless Ritska could do nothing but stare as the sharpened slab in Heracles' hand descended towards him as nothing more than a blur. He'd barely even been able to get his legs to start moving by the time the servant was virtually on top of him. Movement caught him in the corner of his eye. Mash's shield gradually made its way into his field of view as she raised to block the attack, although her own expression looked as horrified as his probably did, moving herself in front of him. She halted with the shield raised high and tensed her body in preparation for the attack. Heracles slammed into her with the force of a freight train. The blow instantly sent her reeling backwards and slamming into Ritska. The two of them were launched from the bow of the ship and further up the deck in a sprawling mess of tangled limbs. Even disorientated as she was, Mash still had enough sense to use her body to absorb the impact of slamming into the deck. It was likely the only thing that saved Ritska's life. The servant wasted no time in seizing advantage of the sudden shock of his attack, instantly bringing his slab back upwards and spinning on his heel as a blur while slashing outwards. Ash had barely enough time to raise Storm Ruler in a blocking motion before Heracles struck. He blinked as the next thing he knew, he was ragdolling through the air and staring as the scenery blurred past him before he crashed face first into the railings of the ship and nearly went overboard. Heracles roared, sweeping out and slamming a kick into Oscar. The poor Astoran hadn't even been fast enough to register the attack before Heracles' heel smashed into him and he was sent flying off the ship. A pain wheeze was the only sound to escape his throat, along with the shattering of metal as the chainmail he wore broke under the force of the impact and sent links clattering to the ground and into the ocean following after him. The Astoran splashed heavily against the water and bounced twice like a thrown stone before he stopped and sank downwards. The berserker leapt down from the bow of the ship and onto the deck, instantly searching for his next target and locking onto Euryale. The goddess froze up as Heracles' full attention fell onto her and his mouth slowly curled into a snarl before he rocketed forwards, shattering the planks he stood upon and releasing a blast of air which staggered Sanora. Asterios threw Euryale away from him as he rushed to meet Heracles. Charge! The larger berserker swung his halberd out at Heracles' head. The demigod halted abruptly and raised his sword to block the attack before swinging upwards and parrying Asterios' halberd into the sky and wrenching it free of his grasp. Asterios reeled backwards before Heracles released a triumphant roar as his whole body swung forwards, lashing out with his left hand in a haymaker which slammed into Asterios' ribs with a crunch. The punch briefly caused Asterios' feet to leave the deck of the ship as Heracles' punch carried him upwards. The Minotaur gasped out a lungful of air as he landed back down, coughing heavily as Heracles rushed him again. Asterios' eyes burned with rage as he threw himself at the berserker as well. The two giants slammed into each other with enough force to rock the entire ship. The servants staggered around as they attempted to right themselves. Asterios blocked Heracles' slash with his remaining halberd. The two weapons ground against each other as Heracles pushed forwards, growling the entire time, and forcing Asterios on the back step. Releasing a roar of his own, Asterios stamped down into the deck of the ship with enough force to split the planks beneath his feet, implanting himself in the deck of the ship and halting his retreat. Heracles growled in response, stepping backwards and hoisting his slab in preparation to attack. A dull sound of metal striking against something equally solid filled the silence. Heracles paused, slowly craning his neck down to his side and seeing the tip of Sanora's spear pressed against his body just under his ribs, the spear failing to even draw a mark from the berserker's skin. Sanora made a small noise of confusion before Heracles exploded into action. Spinning himself, he backhanded the lancer into the air before he swung his entire body around in an axe kick. His heel cracked into Sanora's gut and shattered parts of her armor instantly before she was driven through the deck of the ship and into the bowls of the vessel a second later. Following through, Heracles continued to pivot his body until he was in a tackling position and facing Asterios. The Minotaur widened his eyes in realization and made to block before Heracles threw himself forwards. His left shoulder slammed into Asterios' gut and ripped his footing free of the ship as his arm grasped around his waist before he hoisted the Minotaur into the air. Crying out, Heracles slammed Asterios back into the deck of the ship and sent him through the flooring. Rising up, steam bellowed from his mouth as he craned his neck towards the goddess again. Euryale was frozen between concern for Asterios and terror for her own life. her eyes darting between the berserker and the whole Asterios had been hammered through. Heracles barely waited for her to decide which was more important before he flung himself towards her. The scream was barely out of her throat before Havel virtually appeared from the corner of her eye. The berserker was swinging his own club with both hands wrapped around it towards Heracles. The demigod paused mid-swing, slamming his foot into the ground and spinning his body around towards Havel as the bishop swung the bone at him. Raising the flat of his slab like a shield, Heracles braced himself for impact. Havel struck him with enough force to release a shockwave. The attack caused Heracles to skate backwards across the deck and tear up parts of the ship as he did so. Lowering his makeshift shield, his heterochromatic eyes focused themselves on Havel as he lumbered towards him. The size difference between the two was obvious. Despite Havel himself being a giant, Heracles still had around 30 centimeters height advantage. Not that Havel appeared too daunted as he continued to pace towards the berserker without showing a single sign of hesitance. Heracles looked Havel up and down. A slight glimmer of intellect was obvious within his eyes before it just as quickly vanished. Heracles hunched himself forwards, moving his left hand to grasp the handle of his slab sword and coil it back in preparation for an obvious attack. Something Havel mirrored. The two berserkers stood opposite each other in preparation for the other to make the first move. Heracles exhaled. Havel lunged. The two shot across to each other. Heracles brought the sword down over his shoulder while Havel swung dragon's tooth upwards to meet the weapon. The two berserkers clashed. The explosion of air instantly rocked the ship and sent the debris on the deck shooting off into the water. Ritska groaned as he awoke, moving his left hand up to cradle his forehead. What happened?" he slurred as he felt sore all over. "Senpai." Masha's relieved voice instantly reached his ears. Blinking several times he looked up to see her smiling down at him in clear alleviation before she opened her mouth to speak again. Unfortunately, whatever she had to say was interrupted by what sounded like a landslide. Ritska jolted from where he was sitting at the sudden crashing sounds, snapping up and looking about the ship. Mash was still protectively standing in front of him with her shield up as a defense. Ritska peered around her and promptly paled. The deck of the ship was a mess. Shattered flooring and splinters were in abundance. In the center of the chaos, Havel and Heracles were swinging their weapons at each other like madmen. Heracles' slab crashed into Havel's shoulder and chipped off portions of his armor before Havel retaliated by slamming his club into Heracles' forearm. The demigod released a grunt from the impact before he batted the club aside, coiling his arm back and then throwing it forwards towards Havel's head. The fist slammed into Havel and caused the armored berserker to stagger to the side with his head jerking with the impact. Losing his grip on the club, Havel stumbled backwards before he stamped down and halted his movements. His head snapped back to Heracles before he swung his own fist upwards. Striking Heracles with an uppercut to the chin, the demigod's head jerked upwards and caused him to stumble backwards with the punch. The berserker eventually composed himself, pausing and staring down at Havel. "Heracles is fighting Havel-san." Mash informed Ritska. Sanora-san and Asterios-san were knocked below deck and Oscar-san was knocked over the ship. "Where's everyone else?" Ritska looked around, noticing the other servants already preparing themselves for combat as they stared at the berserkers fighting. "Help Havel." Ritska pointed towards the two. "Archer, provide some support to keep Heracles on his toes." He was currently debating how insane that sentence sounded before shaking his head. "As you wish, but I suspect it will prove challenging." Archer replied back, loosing an arrow directly onto Heracles' head and consuming it with an explosion. Ritska watched as the smoke faded and revealed Heracles' head left completely unharmed. He seems to be protected by some manner of defensive ability which nullifies anything thrown at him so far. As if to immediately discredit Archer, Havel rushed forwards and jumped up, slamming his head into Heracles' face and causing a spurt of blood to rush out from where the berserker broke Heracles' nose. Heracles roared in anger, lashing out and kicking Havel in the gut and instantly rocketing him across the ship. The moment Havel had been blasted clear, it was as if a switch had been triggered. Boudica, David and Archer all instantly attacked the servant. Arrows instantly rained down on top of the berserker and consumed his form in an explosion of smoke while Boudica and David rushed in from either side. The smoke instantly parted the second the two got close enough. Heracles' arms lashed out and revealed his form in full. David recoiled backwards into a roll to avoid being decapitated by Heracles' weapon while Boudica raised her shield to block the punch launched by the berserker. The fist slammed into her shield and launched her away from him. Rushing out of the smoke, Heracles charged down David, continuously swinging the entire time he did. The Israeli king scampered backwards and dodged to the best of his ability as the mad flailings of Heracles tore apart the deck of the ship, cleaving through the wooden planks and sending shattered parts of wood firing off in all directions, several of which slammed into Mash's shield with enough force to be reduced to sawdust. Oscar gasped as he surfaced, coughing heavily as he spat out the water he had swallowed. It was fortunate that he was a fisherman, otherwise he would never have been able to swim. His head wildly swung around before it locked onto the Argo and the Golden Hind. Squinting his eyes, Oscar locked onto the latter of the two ships and was barely able to make out the sounds of fighting on board the ship as the servant, Heracles, managed to somehow single-handedly fight off an entire ship full of servants. Oscar would admit, he was more than a little horrified at the notion. Terrified as he was, Oscar immediately began to swim back to the Golden Hind as fast as he could. "Call it a family spat if you want, just shoot him in the back," Orion virtually demanded as he pointed at Heracles. The berserker stopped and swung his entire body around to stare up at the bear. Orion let out a whimper at being stared down by his larger cousin. Heracles growled and tensed himself to jump upwards. "Oh oi!" Orion backed further into Artemis' grip as he realized the intentions of the berserker. "Hang on, eh? Hey!" Heracles paused when a beam of light slammed into his chest. The force caused him to take a single step backwards but otherwise leave him unhurt. The berserker's head snapped towards his attacker. Drake stood with a cannon over her shoulder, glaring at the Greek hero before she shouted again, "Stop blowing holes in my ship." She shouted, just before she unleashed another volley of arms fire upon the berserker. Heracles growled as he weathered the artillery barrage, remaining undamaged for the most of it and still staring at the captain before he took a single step towards her. "Artemis!" Orion exclaimed, "Shoot him already." "Fine." Artemis pouted, "You're being very unreasonable right now, brother." She called out, leveling her bow towards his head. "You got bigger problems than him, you fuckers. Duck." Orion shouted out his warning. Artemis followed through and dropped low, hanging just underneath the support strut of the sail she had been perched on before Canius slammed into its spear first. Her weapon buried itself in the sail before she let out a click of her tongue and ripped it free. "Ain't every day I kill an Olympian bitch and her man-whore toy." The tanned woman sneered down at the pair as she leveled the spear towards them, especially one of that piece of shit's kids. Orion cringed. "You're still mad about Pos." He was cut off as Canius hurled the spear towards the pair. Artemis grabbed Orion and shot away as the weapon soared past them and pierced through the deck of the ship. Canius followed soon after, rushing towards Artemis in a two-footed drop kick. The goddess threw her bow up in front of her as a shield. Sinu's heels collided with the guard and forced the two towards the deck of the ship at rapid speed. Artemis' back collided with the deck with a heavy thump. The goddess released a pained gasp as she rolled backwards with the blow while Orion was thrown from her grasp and sent flying across the deck of the ship. Releasing a grunt as he rolled, Orion eventually came to a halt. Groaning loudly, he made to stand up only for a hand to roughly grasp the back of his neck and hoist him into the air. Orion flailed in the grasp until he found himself at eye level with Canius. The deep blue eyes stared at him dismissively as they scanned his form. A scoff emerged from her throat. "Really?" she grunted, staring at Orion in disgust. "I'd rather you were in your actual body. Killing you like this feels like I've been cheated." "So then you shouldn't bother killing me." Orion nervously chuckled. Canius' shark-like grin only served to inform him that, no, she was still going to kill him. "Wonder if you're stuffed with cotton." She spoke aloud as she shook him roughly. "I know some people are the toys of the gods, but I never thought it would be literal." Shrugging, she threw him to the ground and stamped down on his body to hold him in place as she raised her spear above in preparation to thrust down into the bear. Several beams of light slammed into her side. Canius grunted as she stumbled off Orion. Releasing a snarl, she turned towards Artemis, who was glaring at her, eyes glowing, with her bow raised and already preparing another arrow of light. "At least I'll get a fight out of one of you," she sneered, kicking Orion away from her and rushing towards Artemis while tanking the attacks while showing very little in the way of response to the attacks as she closed the distance. Artemis hurled herself into the air, flipping over Canius and continually firing arrows at her as the lancer slammed into the spot where she had been. Jerking at the attack struck against her while doing little. Roaring, Canius stabbed her spear into the deck of the ship and tensed. Hefting the spear out, she tore away a section of the ship and swung her body around and hurled the debris towards the goddess. Artemis ducked low to avoid the subsonic planks of wood shooting through the air as she landed down. Canius used the distraction to rush forwards, closing the distance with a vicious snarl present on her features. She abruptly halted when an armored hand burst through the deck of the ship beneath her feet, the gauntlet tightly gripping itself around her ankle and halted her movement. What the she? Canius began to shout in disbelief before the arm pulled downwards. Canius grunted as she was pulled through the deck of the ship into the bowels of the vessel. She kicked out and slammed her foot into her grappler, resulting in a feminine shout of pain as the grip loosened and Sanora was knocked backwards. Canius righted herself, scowling towards the lion-armored lancer. She twirled her own spear and slammed the butt of the weapon into the ground. Pretty gutsy move. Gonna make sure I at least take my time repaying you for that. Bold of you to assume you shall live beyond this moment. Sanora darkly remarked as she twirled her own spear, resting both hands upon the shaft and adjusting her body back for a thrust. I shall not allow any harm to come to Lady Artemis. You sound like that other bootlicker. Canius scowled, then frowned as she squinted closer at Sanora. What is it with that goddess and animals? Must be a weird fetish. She shrugged. Sanora shot forwards, thrusting the spear directly towards Sinu's head. Cracking a grin of her own, Canius raised her left forearm at an angle and diverted the spear off course, the weapon leaving only a tiny mark upon her skin as it was deflected. Cocking her spear arm back, the woman then thrust her own spear in retaliation. Sanora lashed out with a kick, striking the spear just underneath the tip and diverting it away from her gut. Coiling her arm around Sanora's spear, Canius latched onto the metallic shaft and jerked the weapon forwards while lashing out. Sanora was violently pulled into a kick which forced her off her feet and back through the deck into the open. Weakling, Canius scoffed, taking a single step forwards to jump up before a low growl sounded off behind her. The tanned woman blinked and turned around towards the sound. Only for Asterios to catch her in the chin with an uppercut. That, Jason fumed, glaring at the Golden Hind with a growing anger to him, that idiot. As if Heracles needs help from the likes of her. I don't believe she is attempting to assist Heracles, Lord Jason. Medea Lily calmed him, giving a reassuring smile and gesturing to the carnage. Given her history, it is understandable that she would not wish to lose the opportunity to slay a scion of Poseidon. Jason turned towards her with an irritated expression, although it had since simmered down. Let her have her prize. We need only a single god, and it is better to sacrifice the Gorgon to the Ark rather than the Lady Artemis, especially if she is still present in this singularity. Hey! Jason scoffed dismissively. She'll have long since vanished. He sighed. Fine, I suppose it's only natural to allow a starving dog a few scraps of meat to keep it tranquil. He waved his hand. I suppose I can be magnanimous and allow her to settle her vendetta. As long as she doesn't get in Heracles' way. He paused and looked off. What do you think you're doing? Rendell paused, a single foot on the railing of the ship in preparation to jump over. The king blinked in confusion, turning his head to stare at Jason. I was planning on retrieving the goddess in the chaos. You think Heracles needs the aid of a has-been? He frowned, crossing his arms. You've already played your part. Has-been. Rendell's face soured. You. Lord Rendell. Medea Lily quickly interrupted him with a diplomatic aura. Heracles is rather more aggressive in his current summoning and he may find it difficult to distinguish friend from foe in the fighting. She raised a hand to halt the saber. It would be much safer for you to remain so as to avoid potential injury. I am certain Heracles will be able to retrieve the goddess without much trouble. The man looked between Jason and Medea before his lips thinned. Very well. He remarked, stepping off the railings and back onto the Argo. I will adhere to your advice. Good. Jason huffed to himself, looking back to the Golden Hind. Glad you've learned your less. He was cut off when Canius' form went smashing through the deck of the Golden Hind. The woman spiraled through the air without much in the way of control and towards the Argo. Rendell stared up as she approached the spot where he was stood. The king took 2 steps backwards. Canius slammed face first into the deck of the ship. The woman growled and picked her face up to glare at Rendell, who stared back at her without a trace of emotion. Had I attempted to catch you, you would have tried to kill me. Canius opened her mouth to reply, then paused. Mulling over what he said, she offered a begrudging nod of affirmation as she picked herself up. Don't know about. Try, she sneered at him. You would be dead. Turning around, she marched towards the edge of the ship again to jump over. So soon. I'm not leaving till I have that son of a bitch's stuffed head mounted on my spear. She paused, then continued on. There's also that big beast, but I'm prioritizing who I'm killing first. She launched herself off the ship without waiting for a rebuttal. Rendell exhaled gently, shaking his head. Ash groaned as he picked himself up. Rolling his shoulders, he made to move back towards Heracles and Havel still dueling before a thud sounded off behind him. Turning around, he found himself staring at Canius as she landed. The spearwoman stared at the saber in front of her for barely half a second before she lashed out in a thrust towards his head. Swinging his greatsword upwards, Ash parried the strike into the air while throwing the palm of his left hand forwards. A black explosion erupted from his hand and directly in the face of the Canius. The lancer growled and stumbled backwards from the attack, slight singe marks present on the left side of her face. Tricky fucker, aren't you? She ground out, snarling at the saber. Ash remained stone-faced at her, moving his other hand to grip the handle of Storm Ruler in preparation for a fight. TCH. Scowling, Canius moved her left hand to touch the burn marks on her cheek. Huh. Guess you ain't that big a weakling if you can hurt me. She paused, the scoffed, or that fucker's blessings ain't worth shit. Doesn't matter, still gonna key. She ducked low when Ash swung at her neck. The lancer backpedaled as he followed through with a stab towards her leg. She kicked the sword and knocked it off course before swinging her spear towards his head. Raising his sword arm, Ash blocked the lance while pulling his dagger from his belt and thrusting it towards the woman's head. Canius grasped his wrist, stopping the dagger just shy of her face. She jerked her head to the side to avoid losing an eye as the dagger expanded outwards into a glowing crystalline blade. Ash kicked down against her knee, causing her to stumble backwards. The woman let out an aggressive roar as she charged forwards, headbutting Ash in the chest and causing him to stagger away from her. Stamping her feet down, Canius flung her body backwards into a flip and caught Ash in the chin with her feet as she did so. His head jerked backwards with the impact. With Canius still in the air, he raised Storm Ruler and fired off a jet of wind into her body. The gale force knocked her off balance. Her body let out a heavy thud as she roughly landed on her side. Her eyes burned with rage as she quickly shot to her feet and leveled Ash with a hefty glare and a murderous smile. She slowly stood up again as Ash adjusted his position, resting his dagger across his sword arm while he pointed Storm Ruler towards her. The Watchers of Farron had been useful in teaching him to fight with a sword and dagger. Alright then. She growled through a snarling smile. Before I kill that piece of shit bear, I'm going to rip you to pulp. Ash raised a lone eyebrow. What? Nothing to say. What need have I to speak to you? Ash tilted his head. I doubt you have anything worth saying to begin with. Canius blinked once. I'm going to kill you. You say that as if it is supposed to frighten me. Ash remarked as he prepared himself to charge forwards. I've died more than enough times to acquaint myself with the process. You ain't never been killed by me before. Canius sneered as she hunched herself forwards. I like to make mine a bit memorable. Gripping Havel rightly in his grasp, Heracles flipped the berserker over his shoulder and onto the deck of the ship, lurching the entire vessel to one side as he did so. Raising his arms above his head, the berserker clasped his fists together and swung them down like a hammer. Havel raised his arms in a guard as the attack struck. The chain links around his gauntlets shattered from the force of the impact and sent their dented and chipped remains shooting off across the ship. Raising his arms again, Heracles cocked his fist back and threw it downwards. Havel rolled to the side to avoid it, the limb punching a hole straight through the wood where his head had been. Continuing the roll, Havel shot to his feet and swung his right leg forwards. Heracles' head snapped up with the force of the kick slamming into chin. Havel followed through with a series of jabs aimed towards his organs. Heracles released a wheeze as Havel performed a haymaker into his kidneys. The berserker folded with the blow before Havel pulled his left arm across his body and braced it with his right before throwing himself forwards, his elbow smashing into Heracles' cheek and causing him to stumble. Havel made to throw his right fist in a jab when Heracles lashed out and stopped the fist with his palm, clamping down around the appendage before throwing his own jab towards Havel. The stone-armored bishop mirrored Heracles' earlier move and caught the punch with his opposing hand. The two berserkers soon engaging in a shoving match between each other as they threw their entire weight in their respective offensives. Heracles' left eye darted behind him as he faintly saw shadows passing out of the corner of his vision. Snarling, he pulled with all his might and lifted Havel off the ground and swung him like a club. Archer widened his eyes in alarm as he saw Havel's form hurtle towards him, raising a hand in front of himself. A simple metal kite shield formed in his hand before Havel smashed into him, shattering the shield into motes of light and sending him flying backwards. The moment Havel's feet touched the deck of the ship, the bishop performed a similar feat, pulling Heracles with all his might over his head and throwing him off the edge of the ship. Havel paused when he didn't hear a splash, swiftly moving to the edge of the ship and looking over the railings at the surface of the water. Heracles stood upon the waves, or rather a thin layer of glowing purple glass just above the water. Havel's head snapped towards the Argo and glared at Medea, her staff glowing a subtle purple. Growling in anger, Havel turned his attention back towards Heracles just in time to catch a two-footed kick to the chest, the impact blowing him off his feet and sending him skidding across the ship like a stone on a lake. Heracles stood upon the ship, staring at Havel's prone form as they tried to stand up again. Growling, Heracles made to advance before several beams of light struck the side of his head. The berserker paused, slowly turning his head towards Boudica, whose sword was still pointing towards him. The moment he made to charge her down, something slammed into his back and caused a scream to erupt from his mouth. Stumbling forwards, there was a stiffness which gave way to a squelch as Asterios ripped his halberd free of his shoulder. Heracles swung around and threw his right hand in a fist towards the Minotaur's head. Asterios raised his forearm, blocking the punch, although the impact still caused him to stagger back with the attack. Heracles followed through with a vicious barrage of punches against the berserker, knocking the single halberd from his hand. Asterios raised his other arm to join the guard, stumbling backwards as Heracles' rush of punches. His arms soon began blurring as the punches continually rained down on the berserker. Hefting his arm back, Heracles launched an uppercut which shattered Asterios' guard and flung his arms upwards. Cocking his left arm back, Heracles swung his entire body forwards in a jab. The punch slammed in his gut with a thundering impact. Asterios buckled towards the strike. Heracles swung his other arm down and struck Asterios' temple, forcing the berserker downwards and face first into the deck of the ship. Raising his foot above Asterios' head, Heracles made to stamp downwards before Havel tackled him from the side and wrapped his arms around Heracles' waist. Heaving, Havel lifted Heracles into the air before body slamming him into the deck of the ship, splintering the already ruined wood further. Raising his body up, Havel supported his right arm and dropped his elbow onto Heracles' face while he was down. Heracles, already broken nose shattered from the impact as Havel raised himself up, already cocking his left arm back for a downwards punch, as Heracles followed suit. Headbutting Havel, Heracles broke portions of the stone armor and revealed Havel's right eye and forced him away from him and onto his back as he rolled away from the downed berserker. The demigod scrambled to his feet to pursue the advantage before a cry caught his attention. His head snapped around just in time for him to catch sight of Sanora rushing towards him. The lancer stabbed her weapon into the deck of the ship and pushed against it, pole vaulting through the air and landing a two-footed kick against Heracles' chin. The berserker's head jerked back with the impact before he lashed out with his left hand, clasping Sanora's ankle and pulling her out of the air. The woman released a panicked gasp as Heracles hefted her above his head before he slammed her down into the deck of the ship. The strength behind the swing caused the wood to shatter and force half her body through the wood. Heracles showed no mercy as he roughly pulled her free of the hole, only to swing her in the opposite direction and puncture another hole through the ship. Heracles repeated the procedure several more times before he eventually stopped. Sanora dangled limply from his grasp, her armor battered and dented with multiple parts missing. Her face was already beginning to bruise with blood dripping from slashes along her forehead and cheeks. Heracles growled, turning to Havel and raising Sanora a final time like a hammer. Tristar amore mio. A lance of blue light flashed from behind the berserker. By the time he turned around, the projectile had already impacted his head and vaporized it entirely. The headless corpse stumbled backwards before falling down, still holding onto Sanora in his lifeless grasp, the woman thoroughly unconscious. Boudica wasted no time in closing the gap, grabbing onto the lancer and pulling her away from the corpse of the berserker as Havel and Asterios shambled to their feet. Ritska stared at the corpse of Heracles, breathing shakily before he turned towards Jason. The blonde-haired man stared at them with a blank face before he raised his hands. And clapped. Dead silence pervaded across the ship as Jason clapped, his lip twitching into a knowing smile which already made Ritska grim at the prospects they were facing. Nice. Jason complimented with an overly sincere tone, very impressive. It took you that long to kill Heracles, but I suppose you still managed it. That's no small feat. He smiled, leaning forwards against the deck of the ship, his smile shifting into a smirk. So, what are you going to do about the other 11 lives? The silence became filled with dread. E11. Ritska shakily called out. He couldn't help but allow terror to seep into his voice. What? Come now. Jason chuckled amusedly. Surely you know of Heracles, 12 labors. Yeah, good. Grinning, the man continued on, completing 12 labors he was able to atone for that nasty business Hera put him through. His expression darkened briefly before it returned to an amused smile. So naturally, to commemorate his achievement, he is granted 12 lives. He smiled. You've taken one, yes, well done. He haphazardly added on, but well. What are you going to do for the other 11? Ritska's eyes mechanically drifted over to the headless corpse of Heracles. Now not so headless as steam billowed from the wound, already growing into a new head for the servant. Oh, Ritska's eyes were wide. Shit. Havel finished for him as he grabbed his own club in preparation. Canius' back slammed into the railings of the ship, the woman bent over them as she held her spear out in front of her with her left hand, blocking Ash's greatsword while using her right hand to grip his wrist with the dagger poised for her throat. The two struggled for a few moments before Canius released a growl and shoved Ash away from her, spinning around as he staggered and performing a roundhouse kick into his gut to further shunt him away. A fresh roar had Ash blink and snap his head towards the hull, seeing Heracles' head spontaneously regrow itself. Huh. Canius grunted. Guess you losers were able to kill him once. Big whoop. Her voice was dry before she cackled. Guess I'll have to be quick in killing you. Ash swung back towards her head. The woman ducked low and allowed the blade to sweep just above her hair before she launched herself forwards and tackled Ash to the ground. Mounting the saber, she thrust her spear downwards and through his right shoulder, nailing him to the deck before raising her arms and throwing her fists forwards. Her first punch slammed into Ash's jaw and bounced his head off the deck before she launched another punch from the opposite side. The woman maintained a savage grin on her face as she wailed on Ash repeatedly, his face becoming more and more bloodied. When she went for another punch, Ash lashed out with his left hand and clasped it around the wrist. The woman widened her eyes as his grip suddenly began to heat up. Throwing his grip free, she grabbed his collar and swung her head downwards like a battering ram into his nose. Peeling her head back, she sneered down at him. What was all that tough shit you were saying earlier? Ash's eyes locked onto hers. He swung his right arm forwards, his shoulder passing up the length of the spear shaft without any consideration for the pain as he grabbed her and flipped her off him. Ash grunted as he pulled himself free of the deck and swung his right arm into her chin, throwing her head to the side and forcing her onto her back. Ash followed through, finding their positions reversed. He thrust his left palm towards her face. Canius gripped his wrist while raising her legs to force some distance between the two of them. Ash threw his right hand forwards and locked itself around her throat in a stranglehold while he forced his palm towards her face, the gauntlet dripping with black flames. Canius struggled against his grip, one hand trying to pry him free of her neck while the other hand was focused on keeping the burning palm away from her face. Straining against the grip, Canius gradually was able to pry Ash's hand from around her neck free before she kicked him off her. The saber rolled away as Canius coughed repeatedly, growling as she got back to her feet. She was cut off when something slammed into the back of her head. The woman stumbled forwards and then swung her body around to face the attacker. Oscar swung his shield again in a backhanded motion and struck her across the side of her face, sending her reeling away from him. Raising his sword up, he rushed towards the lancer and swung down towards her. Canius caught the straight sword with her hand, abruptly stopping the movement. The two stared at each other as a small drop of blood ran down from the lancer's nostril. The woman's tongue darted out from her lip and wiped it away as she glared at the saber. Must be something wrong here if I'm being hurt by weaklings like you. She punctuated the sentence by kicking Oscar in the gut, sending him flying away from her and crashing into the deck. The woman scowled and turned around, ducking low as Ash swiped for her neck and throwing her fist into his gut. Ash stumbled with the punch before the woman rose up and clamped both her hands on either side of his head and dragged it into another headbutt. Ash staggered away from her, bleeding heavily from being repeatedly struck in the face. Canius made to step forwards before her features flattened. The woman took a single step to the side and easily avoided a lunge from Oscar. The knight sailed past her and directly into a waiting kick. Her knee slammed into his gut and folded his body over it before he dropped to his hands and knees. Canius scoffed, cocking her fist back and swinging it forwards. Her knuckles collided with the back of Oscar's head and slammed him face first into the deck of the ship. She swung around to face Ash just in time to catch a burning haymaker to the face. The woman snarled in pain as the burning palm singed the side of her face before Ash attacked again, throwing a punch from the other side. Raising her forearm, Canius blocked the fist before throwing a quick jab into Ash's collarbone, jerking the unkindled back and moving onto the offensive, swinging her fist towards his face and crunching the bridge of his nose inwards. Canius would admit that it was mildly disconcerting the complete lack of reaction that the saber was giving in response to the punishment he was receiving. Although she just blamed that on him having a high pain tolerance, it wasn't unheard of. Although what was more irritating was that she could still be hurt. It wasn't as bad as it could have been and she knew she had that water ass to thank for that. Although his presence felt muted here, as if it were a distant memory. She supposed someone must have already killed him or something and that was weakening his blessing. No great loss, she could kill these clowns without anyone's help. Mash, try and defend. Ritska ordered. Archer, David, Boudica and Artemis try and harrow from the sides. Asterios and Havel, try and deal with him as best you can. What am I supposed to? You really want to fight Heracles? Ritska gaped at Drake, cutting her off sharply. The woman's jaw snapped shut before slowly shaking their head. All right. We're going to try and protect Euryale and Sanora. She's hurt badly and Euryale is, well. I'm useless in combat. The goddess bluntly admitted, I'm not made for it in the least. I was trying to spare your feelings but all right. Ritska hurriedly nodded his head as he rushed to where Sanora had been dragged, taking one shoulder while Drake grabbed the other. The pair of them began to drag the Lancer further up the ship and away from the conflict as Euryale moved behind them. Kid, Drake warned as they moved away. My ship won't last, I know. Ritska snapped, cringing. Sorry, we need to try and get him off the ship and get away. Easier said than done. Drake grunted back as they rested Sanora down near the edge. We can't fight like this, there's too little room. Roman. Ritska shouted at the communicator. Any ideas? Me. Romani squawked back in shock. I don't know. I know Heracles completed 12 labors but I didn't know anything about lives. I don't know. Ritska desperately snapped back, do something. Mash released a gasp as Heracles slammed his sword into her shield, skating her away from him before he spun on his heel. His eyes locked onto Euryale before he charged forwards, bursting through the defense and sending Boudica flying in the wake of the charge. What are you doing, Heracles? Jason shouted out, for crying out loud, if you act so careless you might end up killing the sacrifice. Havel swung in front of the charging berserker, hunching his body forwards and holding his shield out with both hands around it. Heracles slammed into his defense at full speed. Havel's feet crunched as they sank into the wood but ultimately halted Heracles' charge. The berserker swung wildly as the other servants closed in. His hand clasped at the top of Havel's shield and tried to wrench it to the side before Asterios rushed in from his left side. Charging towards Heracles with his halberd thrust towards his head, Artemis soon releasing a fresh barrage of arrows into his back the entire time and doing little in the way of damage. Archer grit his teeth. He'd rather not have been forced to expose his full capabilities so soon, but the situation called for it. Trace. On. He held his left hand in front of him, a peerless European longsword formed in his grasp. The stunt didn't go unnoticed, however. Medea Lily on board the Argo stared at Archer with slightly narrowed eyes. TCH, Jason growled loudly. Fine. He threw his hands up. Medea, Rendell, go get the goddess. As you wish. Rendell grunted, throwing himself over to the Golden Hind as Medea forged up a dozen skeletal familiars. The boarding party only grew, rushing towards the servants and breaking up their formation immediately. Rendell charged down Archer and forced the servant onto the back foot as their two swords clashed. Rendell noticed the new weapon and stared at Archer suspiciously. A new sword, better than the others. An item box of sorts, I assume. He parried Archer and thrust towards his head. Archer ducked low and swiped with Durandal towards Rendell's knees. The knight raised his leg and stepped backwards to avoid the sweeping attack. I wonder how many more you might have. And how many might hurt him. He nodded towards Heracles. Archer's expression betrayed nothing save the slight twitching of his brow. I suppose I should not expect you to reveal it. Rendell admitted with a shrug, keep your own strengths to yourself. HMPH. Archer grunted, adjusting himself and allowing the history of the weapon to influence his movements. Well. No sense in standing in ceremony. Rendell lunged forwards. Archer blocked and the two quickly fell into step. Rendell soon proved the superior swordsman in terms of pure skill and strength. It was only Archer's experience and ability to read his opponent's weapon which allowed him to even the playing field. Rendell narrowed his eyes as the servant was able to parry, block or avoid his strikes before he even launched them. Boudica effortlessly slashed through the skeletal familiars as David fought by her side. The issue, however, was not their strength but their sheer numbers. The dragon bone familiars encircled the duo while also rushing past them to harass the other servants as well. Boudica grimaced as she struck down another familiar and gazed about the ship. This is most unfortunate, David Riley pointed out as he smashed the skull of another familiar. They're keeping us distracted. I know that. Boudica grunted, cleaving through another skeleton and raising her shield to block a slash. She retaliated with a kick which shattered the ribcage and sent the debris flying off into purple smoke. What do you want done about it? I can't think of anything. David admitted, swinging his staff around to block and counter, but we can't last like this, we need to retreat. I know that. Boudica snapped, but how? Asterios. Euryal's panicked scream echoed out across the ship. Asterios cried out in pain as he fell backwards, the deep slash across his chest from Heracles, blow oozed blood even as he clasped at it. Euryal's voice only served to turn the demigod's attention onto her. Havel struck him in the side of the head with his club, jerking his head with the blow before spinning around and striking him in the ribs from the opposite side. Heracles stepped backwards, growling and charging forwards before Drake's cannon fire slammed into his face, obscuring his vision and allowing Havel to land another hit on him. Dragon Tooth crunched against his knee, popping the joint and causing Heracles to drop down. Havel stepped back and raised the club over his head before swinging downwards, crashing it against the top of Heracles' skull and forcing his head down onto the ground. Making to get up again, Havel raised Dragon Tooth up and swung down once again, braining the berserker before he repeated the attack until he had completely pulverized Heracles' head. Stepping back, he prepared himself for the berserker to revive again. The steam hissed out from the wound as Heracles pulled himself up, glaring at Havel as he swung down once again but making no move to stop him. It soon became clear why as Havel's club slammed into Heracles' shoulder. And did nothing. Havel seemingly stilled in shock, long enough for Heracles to sweep his legs out from underneath him and send him crashing to the ground. He berserker shot to his feet and slammed a kick into Havel's gut and pelted him across the deck and into the captain's cabin, shattering the wooden door and causing a heavy crash to signal out. Heracles' attention snapped towards the cowering goddess, the master and Drake, all of whom rapidly paled. Growling, Heracles launched himself forwards, slab raised high above his head with the intention being obvious. Senpai! Mash cried out in alarm, throwing herself in between the berserker and his targets with her shield raised high. Heracles slammed into her guard and instantly forced her to her knees before raising his club again. That idiot! Jason cursed, I knew his madness would get the better of him. Still cursing, he turned his attention away from the berserker and towards the others. Honestly, he's losing himself, and if he keeps at it, I'm going to lose my chance. Lord Jason, not now Medea. He snapped at the caster and turned his attention back to the fight. Fine. I suppose he'll just have to cool down then. He scowled, turning to the only available person. Why did it have to be her though? Canius. He shouted out across the deck, use your noble phantasm and kill Heracles. Sinu's head snapped up in surprise as she heard the order. You serious? She raised an eyebrow, then shrugged. All right then. Grinning, she turned back to Ash and Oscar as the two faced her. The three of them were a mess, all bleeding from multiple wounds, with Ash and Canius being the worst of the duo, the pair with a litany of bruises on their face from their clash. Canius' whole body soon began to glow bright orange as flames danced around her form. I can go anywhere, right? Canius rushed forwards, her body exploding into a ball of fire as she rushed towards Ash and Oscar. The pair widened their eyes in alarm as Ash raised his hand, manifesting a large tower shield and pulling Oscar behind him as Canius rushed past. Fly, fly, fly. Her appearance shifted to resemble a burning comet. The wake of her explosion blasted both Ash and Oscar off to the side as she charged through, burning away the familiars and causing the servants to take cover. I'm spreading my wings. The comet exploded into the flaming image of a bird as it shot across the deck, headed directly for Heracles. Ritska widened his eyes and pointed towards the attack. Mash, Lord. Mash needed no further comments, already seeing what was going to happen and slamming her shield into the ground. Chaldeas. Lapithe Canius. The burning phoenix slammed into Heracles' back and washed over Mash's shield, the flames instantly scorching Heracles into a burning pulp as they flew overhead. The burning bird soared into the sky and turned about, heading back for the Argo before it shimmered away and Canius dropped free of its dissipating form, landing back onto the deck of the opposing ship. Like that, she cackled, then turned back around. All right then. Mash's shield dissipated, revealing the burning form of Heracles lying face down on the ground, steam already beginning to leak from him as he healed. Asterios' halberd punctured through his torso. Ritska, Mash, Euryale and Drake all gaped at Asterios' form. Having been in the path of the phoenix, he had also been in the wake of the explosion. His body was scorched along the right side beyond recognition, his skin was patchy and peeling with his horn shattered. Asterios, Euryale made to scamper towards him before Drake grabbed her shoulder and pulled her back. Hey, let me go. Asterios panted heavily, leaning down and grasping Heracles' body with his wounded arm and hoisting it up. His eyes locked onto Ritska. Go, he growled out. Ritska stared at him in shock as he already began to make his way towards the Argo, dragging Heracles' regenerating corpse behind him. Let you escape. Wait. Ritska called out after him. You don't need to do this, we can still. Already dying, Asterios gasped out. Ritska noticed the flakes of gold light already shimmering off his body. Will help you, he sniffled, turning to look at Ritska and giving a smile. You got Euryale back. Kept your promise. Thank you, he exclaimed. Asterios. Euryale struggled. Wait, you idiot. Who's going to protect me if not you? She begged. Don't do this. Was happy. Asterios shouted to the sky. Made friends. Wasn't treated like a monster. Tears ran down his single working eye. For that. I love you, Euryale. Growling, Asterios hefted Heracles onto his shoulder as he reached the bow of the ship. Jason stared at him with wide eyes as he realized the intention. He scampered backwards as Asterios threw himself and Heracles over to the Argo. Help. Jason cried out. Rendell released an annoyed sigh as he picked himself up and rushed over, jumping across the ships and landing behind Asterios. That takes guts, monster. Canius boasted as she closed in, idly twirling her spear, looking forward to ripping them out of Yo. Oscar drop-kicked her, sending her stumbling to the side. The knight panted heavily as he pulled his sword free of its scabbard and faced down the lancer and saber. Rendell turned to face him as Asterios panted out, staring at Oscar in disbelief. Go! Oscar shouted across the ships towards Ritska. Quickly, myself and Asterios shall hold them here. Oscar san, don't. Mash made to shout back, only for Oscar to cut her off. This is how I repay my debt to you. Oscar laughed. Go, quickly, and remember that I have hope in my heart for you, Sir Kyrillite. But, motherfucker, Canius rushed forwards at the same time Rendell did. The two closed in on the saber as he tensed his body in preparation. Raising his head high, Asterios shouted out as loud as he could, Chaos Labyrinthos. The water around the Argo imploded inwards as space distorted, instantly causing the ship to disappear. Ritska stared in silence at the spot, remaining stationary even as Drake rushed past him towards the wheel of the ship. Shit, she cursed out loudly. Ash. Get those winds in my sail, we're getting the hell out of here. His shield felt heavy. It was an odd thing, he'd never truly realized how heavy it was until right this moment. Their attacks batter away at his body, there's no mercy from either of them. He knows he is going to die. He knows that this is where he shall meet his final fate. This miracle summoning that was perhaps his once chance of redeeming his failure, and he's going to sacrifice his life for a few minutes. It's perfect. Her spear smashes against his sword arm, his bones protest the attack before her kick strikes against his chest. Something broke with that impact, he could hear the bones break. He raises his shield, the king's sword strikes against it. The impact reverberates through his arm and nearly knocks him over. He never stood a chance to begin with. He was a fisherman at best. But at this moment, in this one moment, he's a knight. He can feel it in his bones, in his undead blood. He knows from the bottom of his heart this is the right thing to do. It's how his noble phantasm works, and he knows Mash will make good use of it. He knows because she's better than him. Her spear swings around, slamming into the side of his head and rattling his brain. His vision blurs as she swings the spear back around from the opposite angle. The king's sword punctures through his lungs at the same time her spear cleaves through the top of his helmet. The king should know what fighting undead is like. The ridge of his shield slams into the king's nose, he staggers away. He slashes at the woman's arm, scratching her skin and causing her to recoil more in surprise than pain. He doesn't blame her, there's a sword in his gut and spear in his head. But he doesn't care, he stands tall despite the pain because even if he'll die, he'll make them work for it. He needs to buy as much time as possible. The stone walls begin to shimmer. Asterios is dying or dead. It's just him against these legends. He stands tall in the face of his death, It's a small thing at first, but he soon can't help himself. It's a genuine laugh, he can't help but laugh. They stare at him oddly, he doesn't care in the least. He's going to die and he doesn't care this time. It was a life well spent and a death well used. I'll be a great knight, father. I'll become one you can be proud of. Fool boy. You're my son. I'll always be proud of you. That's a strange thing to remember at this point. He wonders to himself, but he'd forgotten that completely. He breathes deeply as they rush in again. He'll stand strong. The knight who could only die and pave the way for others. That is his fate. But this time he'll do it willingly. He pants heavily, the spear protrudes from his heart as the woman looms over him. They're back on the surface. The blonde man is raging in the background. Her boot rests on his chest, pressing down against his body as she rests her hand on the spear. Where is it? She hisses at him, only reason I'm here is for that stupid fucking bowl. Give it to me and I'll kill you quick. The laugh this time is bitter. It makes sense now, why she kept him alive. He looks up, his eyes stare into hers and he gives an empty smile. Not with me anymore. She snarls at him, fucking useless. Then twists the spear and rips it free. Ash stared at his bottomless box, the air was somber as the Golden Hind sailed away at full speed. Storm Ruler clenched tightly in his hand as he unleashed a gale directly into the sails of the ship. He looked back across the deck of the Golden Hind. Or what remained of it. The battle had destroyed much of the ship with parts along the bow still missing and multiple holes punched through the upper hull ranging in size from fist-sized to large enough to fall through. Ritska and Euryale were silent, both of whom were staring in the direction they had fled the Argo from. Oddly enough, David had been silent as well. The man had lost his usual smile and appeared stone-faced instead. I cannot hold it anymore. He thrust the large golden bowl into Ash's hands. The unkindled stared at it in surprise, then looked at Oscar. It is precious. Do not lose it. Sighing, the knight stood up. Asterios is too wounded, and if they kill him before he can do what I think he will do, our chance is lost. I will delay them for as long as I can. You'll die? Yes. I will. Oscar nodded his head, but I will die believing I have guided better heroes along the path of salvation. An empty laugh erupted from his throat. If I do not get the chance, I would like you to apologize on my behalf. Tell David that he was right about faith. I never would have thought of this before. Too cowardly. He looked towards the deck as Asterios leapt across the ships. Goodbye. Farewell. Ash nodded back, placing the golden dish in his bottomless box. I will keep it safe. That is all I ask. Thank you, truly. He chuckled. It feels strange to knowingly charge to your death. He mused aloud. But it shall benefit you more than my life. I wonder if Lord Bed. Never mind. He dismissed the thought and prepared himself. Mash suddenly jerked as she felt something invade her body, panting heavily as she fell to her knees, instantly earning the attention of everyone else on deck. Mash! Ritska called out in alarm as he rushed over to her, sliding down beside her and grabbing her right shoulder. Are you all right? Panting, the shielder struggled to nod her head before the communicator flashed on. What the heck? Romani's voice came through. What are these readings? Are these instruments broken? Olga's voice soon followed in equal measure of disbelief. How can what? Ritska worriedly asked. What's wrong? It's Mash. Romani struggled to explain. These readings. It's like she's been powered up by a command seal. What? Ritska and Mash blinked in surprise. But I haven't. And no, Mash's eyes widened. It's not a command seal. Then Oscar Sand's noble phantasm. Mash's eyes began to tear up. He reinforced you? Ritska guessed. Mash offered a shaky nod as she wiped her eyes. Ritska leaned back and stared out across the horizon. Hope in my heart, huh? He pursed his lips. Yeah. Centipede? Mash asked, looking at him in surprise. Ritska shook his head. Nothing. Just wondering how I'm going to live up to someone's expectations is all. And, well, Oscar is gone, but his presence lingers on in post-death buffing. Heracles and Havel fought, not a lot of room for them to really cut loose though, but I imagined I handled it well. Anyway, rip Oscar. Welcome to Fanfic Audiobook, your go-to place for immersive audiobooks. If you enjoy the content, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel for more amazing stories. Chapter 72, Raiders of the Not So Much Lost as It Was Currently Misplaced Ark. The ship progressed at a steady pace. Despite the horrific damage it had suffered, the vessel was still able to sail without much in the way of visible problems. The one benefit being that the damage had been limited to being above deck. Ritska stepped over one of the small holes as he moved across the deck of the ship. His expression was blank as he did so. Slowly closing in on the area where Sanora was currently resting alongside the other injured servants, the glowing orb of light above them signaled Ash already having deployed a healing spell, although even then, he doubted results would be fast going for the Lancer. How is she? He asked as soon as he was close enough. Sanora craned her head up to give Ritska a decent look at her bruised and bloodied face. Her left eye had swelled shut and her bottom lip had been split open. To say nothing of the fragments of armor which had split off from her suit only to bury themselves in her body. I'll be in fighting condition she trailed off, coughing heavily and falling back onto her side. In an hour? Wounds like this are nothing, she murmured out. Ritska stared at her with an obvious note of disbelief before he turned his attention to Ash, raising a questioning eyebrow. She won't be moving for some time. The saber replied. His own face had bruises and cuts present upon it, although they were already showing signs of healing. Warmth is gradual restoration for low wounds, but it doesn't last long. He nodded to the Lancer. She is in need of an actual practitioner of miracles. Nonsense, Sanora heaved. All right, you can stop moving for a start. Ritska pointed at her. We've already got enough. He cut himself off, biting his lip and exhaling. Just rest for the moment. We've managed to gain some distance. He turned his attention to his communicator. Right. Yeah. Romani's face flashed up, the man nodding his head. We're looking at the readings now and it looks like the Argonauts aren't in your location, nor are we detecting any magical disturbances. The man's lip morphed into a strained smile. It looks like Asterios and Oscar were able to buy you enough time for a clean getaway. Ritska stared at him. Clean. That's not what I know, Ritska sighed, moving his left hand up to cradle his forehead. I know, what about Mash? He shifted the subject, trying to distract himself from the obvious elephant in the room. How are the readings looking on her? Turning his head across the ship, he saw the shielder currently helping to hammer in wooden boards to cover up the holes. She says she's fine, but yeah, I was a little worried too. Romani admitted. The readings of her stats jumped suddenly and I was worried if you used a command spell to empower her or something. That aside, we've managed to determine the link. Olga interrupted. Romani wheeled his chair to the side as the director leaned forwards. The drain on your person from the saber. Oscar. Ritska gently corrected, then noticed the blank stare from the director at the interruption, just to avoid confusion. From Oscar. The director corrected, still staring at Ritska with a pensive expression. His drain on your magical reserves flatlined at the same time that Mash's parameters were suddenly increased. Adding onto this was the sudden release of magical energy consistent with the triggering of a noble phantasm but not the complete activation of one when he boarded the Argo. So, Ritska wet his lips, placing one hand on his hip. What does that mean? It was likely a support-based suicide-type noble phantasm. Romani delicately put, we were able to see some of Oscar's parameters and they were not very good for a saber servant. Or any servant. His parameters aside, it is not out of the realm of disbelief that saw Oscar marked Mash as a target and then, at the moment of his death, supported her in much the same way a talented caster could. She frowned. As for how long it lasts, we cannot determine that at this time. These readings could be anywhere from a few hours to a day. So, she's powered up. Ritska surmised. How is she looking then? Very good. Romani scooted back into view, smiling. All her physical parameters have received a plus onto them. Quote. Which means, right. Romani looked through the findings. She'll be stronger, more durable and a bit faster than she was before. Oscar died. Ritska finished. Hope in my heart. Shaking his head, he looked over to the shielder. What else can you tell us about the Argonauts? We already know about Heracles. They're top-class servants. Romani bluntly put, the Argonauts are naturally famous heroes and while they all aren't the same as Heracles, that doesn't mean they're slouches either. The only servant I can see not posing too great a threat in terms of combat would be Jason. Really? Ritska blinked? Wasn't he the captain? He was. Romani agreed. However, considering many of the tales of the Argonauts feature him using his intelligence rather than his combat prowess, it's safe to assume that he is likely the weakest servant in terms of power and with how he seemed to view you. Like trash. Ritska huffed. And the other two? Cenis or Canius? Olga sighed. They are a servant whose history is directly related to the Olympian gods, or more accurately Poseidon. How? Ritska titled his head. She immediately went for Orion and Artemis, so I assume she doesn't like them. No, she doesn't. Suffice to say that her legend is not a pleasant one. After being raped by Poseidon, she asked him to turn her into an invincible man. Invincible? Ritska blinked. Ash hurt her, so she can't be that invincible. Fujimaru-kun, Ash has personally killed 5 gods by his own admission. Romani pointed out, suffice to say his ability to slay gods likely means that wielding divine blessings against him isn't going to provide an enemy servant with that great an advantage. Artemis herself struck her several times with her bow and wasn't able to break her skin at all. Alright, so the only one who can hurt her is Ash. Rituska nodded her head, and Heracles has. He had 12 lives. He raised his hand. He was killed by Artemis. He raised a single finger. By Canius. Another finger. And by Havel? He paused mid-finger raising and turned to the berserker with a questioning expression. You killed him as well, right? Havel nodded. Smashed. Skull. Right, so Havel killed him as well. Ritska nodded his head, raising the final finger, so Heracles has 9 lives left and his resistance to attacks seems to be really weird. Sanora couldn't hurt him but Havel, Asterios, Canius and Artemis could. He looked to the communicator. Any ideas? Romani and Olga grimaced. Well, we don't have much of an answer for that. Romani replied, you were able to kill him twice, once with Artemis and the second time with Havel's club, while other weapons seemed to pose him no threat at all. Okay, so what did those attacks have in common? Quote. Rank. Olga realized, Berserker's club is recorded as being an A-rank noble phantasm. Artemis Tristar is also a rank, which means that Canius Noble Phantasm would also have been a rank. She explained, slowly nodding her head. It would explain a great deal. I assume those of you without an A-rank Noble Phantasm couldn't harm him. She got shakes of the head in response. Alright, so he needs really top-grade attacks to even wound him. Ritska grimaced, then frowned. But Havel hit him again after he revived and he didn't hurt him at all. True. Romani realized, humming and cupping his chin. Perhaps he gains resistance against what had previously killed him. He shrugged. It would fall in line with his noble phantasm relating to his 12 labors. He overcame every single one of them, so maybe he overcomes the same attack. That is a surprisingly intelligent guess. Olga commented, staring at Romani with a mildly impressed expression. Perhaps there is hope for you. Is that a private texting channel I see open there? She squinted her eyes at a screen next to Romani. The man nodded his head. Quote. This is a direct line to Da Vinci's workshop. Romani explained. Olga sighed. Da Vinci came up with it, didn't she? Yes. Well, I'm not surprised in the least. She turned back to the master. That aside, we are placed in an unfortunate set of circumstances. According to this deduction, we would need another 9 rank noble phantasms to use against Heracles to kill him. Her expression soured, and that is without having to worry ourselves about the other Argonauts and the enemy saber attacking you at the same time. Ritska sighed, nodding his head. Yeah. He then blinked, looking towards Ash. Hey. Ash. The saber looked up and towards them. Yes? Your bottomless box has a couple powerful weapons, right? Yes. Ash nodded his head. It does. How many are a rank? He asked with a slightly hopeful expression. Ash frowned in thought and then moved his hand over to his bottomless box, flipping the lid open and holding his hand above the exposed box. His expression cycled through several emotions before he nodded to himself, looking back to Ritska and nodding. I have 10 offensive noble phantasms of a rank. I believe that is sufficient. Dead silence spread across the ship. All the present servants paused and slowly stared in his direction, their expressions blank. The only one who barely showed any reaction was Archer, who seemed more surprised that the saber had revealed that fact. Because he was. Ritska released a heavy sigh of relief. Thank goodness for that. So we're not entirely hopeless yet. He paused and then frowned. But the issue is providing a window for you to use your noble phantasms. You have that many high-ranked noble phantasms? Romani gaped at Ash. And those are only of a rank? How many noble phantasms do you actually have in there? Technically the box is one of my noble phantasms. Ash corrected before he frowned. But in total, in terms of weapons, I have more. I'd imagine. Olga nodded her head. For the time being, you are our weapon against Heracles. She then paused, realizing something. However, you are also our only individual capable of harming Caeneus as well. Perhaps not. Romani pointed out, looking at their skills. Both Ash and Havel have the Mystic Slayer skill at a rank. So that could mean that Havel could also harm Canis. Yes, but Havel is also our physically strongest servant. Ritska pointed out, we need him to try and fight Heracles on even ground. Might not be able to kill him, but he would at least be able to match him and provide Ash with the windows to change his weapons to kill him. Ah. Right. Romani hummed, nodding his head. Yeah. And if it's a rank attacks which can only harm Heracles, Havel should technically be able to kill him another time. Really? Ritska blinked. How do you figure? He's got a plus rank strength. Romani pointed out. I'm sure if he hit someone hard enough or used his strength to kill him rather than his club, it would be able to take another life. Ritska looked towards Havel. The berserker stared back at him through the grills in his helmet. Do you think you'd be able to kill Heracles with your bare hands? Havel remained silent for a few moments, then nodded his head once. Can manage, he replied back, then fell into another silence. All right then. Ritska nodded his head. We have Havel to attack Heracles and try and block him until Ash can defeat Canis. But they'll probably attack at the same time. He realized with a grimace, which would be a mess. Pausing, he moved his left hand to cup his chin. Perhaps we would have to split them up, try and isolate them so we could defeat them all individually, but there is Rendell and Medea to worry about as well. To begin with, we are aware of their objective. Archer spoke up from his spot leaning against the mast, and also aware of personal hatred. He looked between Artemis and Euryale. Ritska understood his meaning. The boy frowned. You mean use Artemis and Euryale as bait? There was no point where Heracles did not attempt to grab Euryale. Archer pointed out, tilting his head, and given Caeneus' legend, and from what we have seen, she would not miss the opportunity to slay a scion of Poseidon and a goddess of Olympus to boot. Ritska nodded his head, looking over to Euryale and Artemis. So we split them up, have them charge off in opposite directions and hope that they take the bait. We can try and at least delay Heracles for as long as possible, and once Ash kills Canius, I can summon him with a command seal and we can take out Heracles. That seems like a risky plan, Fujimaru-kun. Romani pointed out, how can you be sure they would even take the bait? Simple. Ritsuka exhaled. We'll have to provide them with a target too tempting to resist. He then paused. Before that, what does Jason even want Euryale for? He already has the Grail, so why would he need her? Romani frowned in thought while Olga hummed. That is strange. Romani pointed out, I'm not seeing why he would need Euryale. As a servant she's not the best at being a combat-oriented servant, and I don't think his interests fall in line with Blackbeard's. So their motives remain a mystery, huh? Drake grunted from behind the steering wheel. Can't say it matters though, all we need to do is stop them first. David coughed loudly, bringing the attention over to him. That isn't exactly true. What is it? Romani narrowed his eyes at the man. Do you know what they're after? I heard Jason shouting something about a sacrifice, but I hoped I was mistaken. He frowned, but as it stands, I cannot think of anything else it could be as for why he would require both the Holy Grail and a goddess. The king walked towards the group, his expression unusually serious. Captain, he called out to Drake, there's an island we need to sail towards, I'll point you in the right direction. David. Ritsuka looked at the man with a concerned frown. What is it? What are we looking for? Simple. David turned to him with a smile, although this one was noticeably more anxious than his usual ones. We're looking for my noble phantasm. Your noble phantasm? Romani blinked at the man. Did you drop your special stone in the water or some? He paused, his eyes went wide and snapped to David in horror. It's not. If you're thinking about what I think you are. David nodded his head grimly. And I believe you are. Then yes, it is. What is? Olga looked between the two of them. What is it? What's got you so worried? King David of Israel is famous for slaying Goliath. Romani explained slowly, so much so that he qualifies for the archer class. However, there is another legend he has ascribed to him. After the capture of Jerusalem from the Philistines and the designation of the city as the capital, King David had a box containing the original commandments from God within the city. It's famous enough that it is linked to him and as such would count as a part of his legend. David solemnly nodded his head. But that's just crazy. Romani exclaimed, there's no way something that powerful could be summoned. It's not like I can summon it to my side. David replied, it exists independent of me, but I decided that it would be best if I placed it somewhere for safekeeping. I was even able to assign a guardian to it. He smiled, so it wouldn't be left undefended. I mean, she never told me her true name, but I'm sure she's trustworthy. He nodded his head, even if she didn't want to hold my hand. This is no time for your ramblings. Romani shouted in annoyance, turning his attention to Ritsuka. Fujimaru-kun, you have to get to that island and keep it safe, and whatever you do, don't touch it. Don't let anyone touch it. Touch what? Ritsuka and Olga shouted at the same time in equal parts impatience. The Ark of the Covenant. Canius scowled as she sat at the far corner of the Argo, staring out across the ocean. I can tend your piss off. She shut down Medea after barely half a second thought. She wasn't going to accept healing from that bootlicker. She frowned, she only ever remembered Medea being like that because of Aphrodite. The Lancer internally shrugged. It probably didn't matter all that much anyway. Perhaps it would allow me to determine how they harmed Yo. Again. Piss off. Canius repeated, looking over her shoulder and staring down at the caster servant. Her lip slowly twisted itself into a snarl. Now. Very well. Medea bowed her head, taking a step away from her, but I'll be here if you change your mind. We're all servants working for a common cause. Ha! She barked out an ugly laugh and gave the caster a knowing smirk. Sure. Medea's smile froze for a split second before it faded away into a cordial expression. Of course, I seek to realize Lord Jason's dream as best I can interpret. She replied, although I confess to being puzzled as to your appearance here, perhaps. That's my business. She waved her hand in a shooing motion. Go back to that dumbass or something. He's probably got more patience for your hollow praise anyway. Medea wordlessly left Canius alone, turning around and moving back across the ship in the direction of Jason, who still stood at the opposite end of the Argo and was currently shouting to Heracles about trying to better control himself. The Lancer scoffed. It was a lost cause if ever she'd seen one. Quite how that big bastard ever found the patience to put up with that useless dumbass's weight was beyond her ability to understand. She'd have dumped his worthless hide in a shallow grave by now. Or no grave at all and just chucked his ass into the ocean. She smirked at the thought of his panicked face as she turned back across to stare at the ocean. She hated this view so much too. Nothing but ocean and the blessings which seemed to be worthless if any common loser could hurt her. She got scratched by some pushover, which told her how worthless Poseidon's favor was. You seem stressed. She jolted as the voice reverberated through her skull. She found it disgusting how pleasant it was as well. The way he spoke was as if he was greeting an old friend or something. Fuck do you want now? She called back through the link. I had thought it would be best if I at the very least checked up on you, I believe the expression is. The voice chuckled as if they had told a mildly amusing joke. Besides, it is customary for masters and their servants to speak frequently, or so I have been told. You've checked up on me. Now piss off. Now, Canis. No need for such harsh words. The voice gently chided her. She felt a slight pinch through the link in the back of her head, not entirely painful but not pleasant either. I allowed you free rein to do as you wished in that singularity provided you did my favor in return. Do as I wish. She loudly scoffed through the link. That blonde dumbass and his ass-kissing wife are going to blow it up. What am I supposed to do? So the presence of Artemis and Orion isn't of interest to you? They replied in a knowing, and slightly amused, tone of voice, truly. She stilled, slowly straightening herself out. You knew they'd be here. Naturally. And you didn't tell me. Would it truly have changed anything? I required your aid in retrieving a certain object and an individual who would be easily accepted by the Argonauts and you were the prime candidate. Their reply was dismissive, your personal feelings barely factored into the decision at all. Yeah, you're an asshole. We all know. Canius growled back, her hands tightening around the edge of the ship, so why now? You haven't spoken since you summoned me. Because that was before I had cause to doubt your abilities. The voice turned cold, the pinching sensation in the back of her mind began to steadily increase until it was a mildly uncomfortable headache. The servant who held the Lord vessel was barely a fraction of your strength and I had believed you could easily have slain them. And they are dead. Yes. What was their name, out of curiosity? Why the fuck would I know or care? Shame. The voice gave a disappointed sigh. Regardless, the Lord vessel had managed to slip through your fingers and now finds itself in the hands of the one individual in the Chaldean roster who can kill you. Canius scoffed. Yeah rig, she was cut off, her body hunched forwards as the sensation in her mind burned for a split second. Agonizing pain shot through her head and caused her to clench her hands against the deck of the ship, cracking the wood slightly before it stopped and she hissed through her teeth. I haven't finished speaking yet. The voice informed her, for a single moment. I want you to banish the arrogant thoughts from your mind about how other servants are inferior to you. He has already demonstrated a capacity to harm you. Not because he was blessed or managed to become the object of interest for a passing lord, but because he slew them. Quote. Gods. Not the divine spirits you understand them as, but true gods. Although the lords of Cinder are raised to godhood, that does not remove their status as divine. The voice explained with a hint of irritation. Do you understand how low you truly factor in when compared to his previous prey? So, Canius scoffed, I can hurt him just the same. In fact, if he's so powerful, why don't you bring your lazy ass down here yourself? Because contrary to whatever you seem to believe about me, I do have much more important agendas to concern myself with. While the capture of the Lord vessel would certainly benefit me, it is not of vital importance. The voice chided as if speaking to an unruly child. I summoned you because given your history, I believed that you would be amenable to a deal and would jump at the opportunity to enact retribution against anything of the sea god's ilk. It was a choice made in the spur of the moment and remains an act of charity I can rescind at any time. Yeah, Canius scoffed, so you just came to have a go at me for not being able to tell he passed off your precious bowl. I came to affirm that my faith in your abilities was not misplaced. You summoned me, she seethed through the link. I'll get your fancy fucking bowl, just let me work. Quote. Very well. However, I should remind you of the need to be intelligent. They will likely attempt to split you up when you encounter them again, therefore. You think I'm some kind of dumbass? Canius snarled through the link, her hands clenching into fists. I know how fucking strategy works. Quote. Clearly. Her master remarked disbelievingly. Very well then. You may do as you please, I will await either news of your victory or the disappearance of our link. Mark my words. I'm going to beat your ass one day. She growled back, her voice tinged with indignation and savage anticipation. What pissed her off more was the fact that her master had the nerve to laugh at her. I'm sure. He spoke out between chuckles. We've already fought once, but you may challenge me as many times as you feel the need to sat those self-harming desires of yours. You son of a. She paused when she felt the link cut off, the presence which had flooded her mind just as quickly departed. Scowling, Canius turned away from the ocean view and made her way towards the staircase leading to the lower deck. She needed to let off steam, and if she saw too much of that pompous ass, she'd take his head off. The Ark of the Covenant. Mash choked out in surprise as Ritska informed her of what had been discussed. The master nodded his head in grim resignation. But that sort of thing, she then paused, frowning, what manner of noble phantasm would it be? Quote. Probably not great. Ritska shook his head, but I'm working off movie logic here. Nothing involving the Ark of the Covenant ever ends well in films. As for legends concerning it, Roman made it pretty clear that touching it was a bad idea, and David wholeheartedly agreed with him. Why would touching it be bad? Mash asked, tilting her head in mild confusion. Apparently the last person who did so just died. Ritska snapped his fingers to punctuate the sentence, just got struck down. David says it will do the same to anyone who touches it without proper authorization from God. Mash's confusion didn't lift, but why would the Argonauts be looking for it? That is less clear. Ritska admitted. David said he would explain what he thought better once we arrived on the island where he was keeping it, but admitted that he himself doesn't understand why anyone would do it. Ah, I see. Mash nodded her head in understanding, then falling into a silence where she stared at her feet. Ritska continued to look at her, soon reaching up and scratching the back of his neck. Listen. Mash, we think we understand where this new power. It's from Oscar San. Mash gently cut him off, slowly nodding her head and flashing Ritska an understanding smile as he jolted in surprise. How did? I just knew, she quietly admitted, for a little while now. That is two heroic spirits who have entrusted me with their power, and I'm not sure what I've done to deserve it. You don't need to do anything to deserve it. Ritska politely reprimanded. They made their choice to give it to you, and Oscar. He exhaled, reaching up and scratching his forehead. He died believing in us. That we would succeed, and I for one would like to live up to his expectations. He nodded his head, lowering his hand from his face, because it would mean we wasted his sacrifice otherwise. His and Asterios. Mash bit her lip. We have lost allied servants before, but we weren't actually there when they, Ritska finished quietly, his sentence trailing off as his eyes darted away. Marie said how Mozart sacrificed himself for her, and we got luck in Rome by not losing anyone, but this is the first time we lost an allied servant and saw it happen. Mash completed the sentence, taking a deep breath. She looked up. I'm worried that we might not. Let's not get too down about that. Ritska gently cut her off. We're going to do this. For Oscar and Asterios. He reached out, placing a comforting hand on Mash's shoulder. That much I am certain of. We're going to beat Heracles and the other Argonauts and save this era. Mash stared at him in silence before her face split into a confident smile and her head bobbed in a fierce nod of determination. Yes, senpai. Ritska. The pair stopped, turning around to see Ash staring at them, his expression somewhat troubled. Ash-san. Mash blinked at him. What's wrong? There is something that I must reveal to you. He spoke slowly, moving his hand to his bottomless box. It was in Oscar's possession before he passed it along to me, knowing he would be unable to protect it for much longer. The unkindled looked between the pair of them. It might be best if you also inform the doctor. We're listening. Romani's voice came through the communicator. The director feels that constant communication is a must for the time being, especially with something like the Ark of the Covenant in play. Understandable. Ash nodded. Objects of godly construction are usually powerful. Which brings me to what Oscar was carrying on his person. It took me some time to properly understand what I held, at least in part. He finished. All I can garner from it is that it is also a construct of lords. A divine construct? Olga's voice came through, sounding more curious than anything else. And the saber had it in their possession. I can only assume it was not something which could be used offensively, else they would have used it. Its use eludes me, Ash replied. I would have ignored its existence entirely until we returned to Chaldea, where I became mortally wounded. We're not gonna entertain that last one right now. Ritska politely cut him off, but go on. Indeed. The unkindled nodded his head, flipping open the lid of his bottomless box. I would have ignored it to avoid adding on to our concerns. However, with recent information being made available and with talk of divine constructs, I believed it would be best that I informed you of what had recently come into my possession. What the hell? Olga exclaimed. Several alarms went off in the background as the shape slowly took form in Ash's hands. Both his arms spread shoulder-width apart to accommodate for the diameter of the shape, while Ritska and Mash widened their eyes at the sudden reveal. What are these? What is this? These readings are similar to, Romani went on. The shape solidified into a great golden basin which Ash held out in front of him in full view of the other two. The sheer power the object radiated had Ritska and Mash take a single step back while earning the attention of all the other servants on the deck of the ship. The heck is that? Ritska gaped at it. A giant golden bowl? Bowl, Olga sputtered. That's a Holy Grail. Awah. Ritska recoiled from it, eyes wide with surprise, while Mash demonstrated a similar expression of shock. A Holy Grail. But that. Hang on there. Romani interrupted him, the doctor's voice strained but still holding a hint of composure. Its readings are very, very similar to that of the Holy Grail, however I can already see some mild differences on my end. Look at these numbers, Director. There was a pause and a hum from the woman. It seems drained. She muttered, no, it still holds a tremendous amount of magical energy, but it's much less than what a Grail should be capable of holding. Suffice to say that it's weaker than the one in the Argonauts and in Francis Drake's possession. So it cannot cause that great an issue with the singularity you are in. Oh, that's good. Ritska breathed out a sigh of relief before staring at the bowl. Still, you got this from Oscar. There was a brief flash of magical energy from your location over an hour ago. Romani informed, but at the time I assumed that it was related to the Argonauts. That must have been when Oscar handed it to you, right Ash? My ability to accurately document the passage of time is still poor. Ash replied, then nodded his head, but yet, Oscar passed it off to me before he boarded the opposing ship with Asterios with the express wish that I keep this safe. That's smart thinking. Romani admitted, with one Grail already in their possession, they're dangerous enough. Adding on another one, even if it isn't as powerful, is still a tremendous disadvantage. Still, to think he was carrying around a Holy Grail this entire time. But, why didn't he tell us? Mash asked, her expression troubled. Surely. Probably for the same reason I didn't immediately inform you of the Ark first. David commented as he ventured closer, it is our own duty to see them protected, and while I might have handed guarding the Ark off to someone else for the time being, I am still aware of it at all times without wanting to burden another. I was trusted to keep it safe, and that is what I intended to do. The king paused next to Ash, nodding to the bowl. There is safety in ignorance. If you were not aware of it, then our enemies wouldn't have been either. David crossed his arms. Had you known he had it, it would have made more sense to try and protect his life. Pride as a knight aside, our opponents would have doubtless noticed our efforts to protect a singular servant above others. And they would have gone for him, Ritska surmised, looking back at the basin. Still, to think he had to protect this the whole time. David nodded, considering he was able to allow our escape and ensure it didn't fall into less trustworthy hands. I would say he did his role as protector admirably. He asked me to tell you that your words on faith were correct. Ash spoke to David. The man briefly looked surprised and his expression settled into a sad smile. I see. He slowly nodded his head. I'm glad he was able to find his strength of spirit at the very end. Taking a deep breath, the man exhaled slowly. However, we now have two items we need to keep safe. He paused, then looked to Ash, although the Argonauts seem ignorant of its existence at the moment. Focus on one thing at a time. Ritska nodded his head, looking to Ash. For the time being, put the Divine Basin. Divine Basin? Well, it's not really a Grail, is it? Ritska scratched the back of his neck. And calling it the Holy Bowl feels a little insulting. So, Divine Basin. It works, right? Quote. I suppose it does. David nodded his head, looking towards it. It was definitely forged by the hands of the divine, but it is not my area of expertise, and considering that Oscar was carrying it. The gods of Ash's world. Ritska surmised, we can worry about its origins later though. The master affirmed once again, for now Ash, you should keep it in your box for safekeeping, that's fine, right? That had been my intention from the beginning. Ash nodded his head, moving the golden basin back into his bottomless box. I only wished to keep you informed of the situation so as to avoid causing undue alarm when we return to Chaldea. David gave him a raised eyebrow. When is it? That's a very positive outlook you have there. Most matters in my experience are simply a matter of when rather than if. Ash replied. Given enough tries, there is little that cannot be eventually overcome. You had the benefit of dying repeatedly and coming back to life. Ritska pointed out, gesturing to himself and Mash. We don't have that. The shielder shook her head in the background. That's probably for the best. Romani replied, as of now, Ash's bottomless box is likely the safest place for it. As long as he doesn't drop it again, Olga dryly remarked. SNRK. Ritska covered his mouth with his hand, hiding his laugh and giving a sage nod to disguise his obvious mirth. Mash remained silent, although the subtle biting of her lip indicated her own effort to avoid laughing. Ash remained stone-faced, for all of a few moments. Then his eyes shifted downwards. I believe I have apologized enough. That was before I found out that you could have lost as 10 a rank noble phantasm. The woman shouted. Ash flinched slightly. What is? Fujimaru. Keep that box attached to him. I don't care if you have to nail it to his body. Yes, director. Ritska nodded his head. I'll make sure he doesn't lose it. There really isn't a need for this OL. Not a word from you, Butterfingers. She cut him off. Make sure you don't drop that and remain alert. You are currently our best hope at defeating both Canis and Heracles. Well, I wouldn't say best, but definitely the easiest. David pointed out. Definitely more plausible than having one or both of those two touch the Ark. Wouldn't you have to lure them to the Ark to do that? Romani pointed out. And wouldn't that be incredibly risky to begin with? Also, we're talking about Heracles and Canis here. Were we planning on just tripping them up onto the box? That's why I said, more plausible than my plan. David waved his hand. Much easier to just use whatever assembly of weapons our friend here got on his no doubt extraordinary travels through the world than to try and trick a couple of high-tier servants into walking into the Ark. That aside, how far are we from your island? Ritska asked the Israeli king. The man gave a gentle hum in response as he looked thoughtful for a few moments. At the moment, no clue. David shrugged. He raised his hands placatingly at the flat stare he got in response. Hey now, it's not like I did much in the way of sailing in life. I can have a general sense as to how close I am to my noble phantasm, but that doesn't translate into accurate distance. It's more like a compass. So we could be weeks away and never know? Well, that seems a bit on the cynical end of estimations, but yes. The man admitted, although personally I am hoping for no more than a day. Oh, well, if you're hoping our journey doesn't take that long, it's fine then. Romani muttered under his breath, just loud enough for the speaker in front of him to carry the words through the communicator. Would you rather I not be here? David Riley pointed out. If you were not here, then the Ark wouldn't be here either. Romani flatly replied. In this situation, yes. It would have been better if you hadn't been summoned. Just because you're technically correct. Ritska rolled his eyes in amusement and sent an exasperated smile towards Mash. The shielder glanced at him and offered a helpless shrug at the same time. The pair looked towards Ash, who was standing in between David and Romani, currently speaking through Ritska's wrist, with a curious expression on his face as he looked between the two of them. The saber frowned and looked towards Ritska. These two spend a great deal of time in conflict, yet I cannot sense any true hostility in their words. Is this manner of conversation normal? Oh, yeah. Ritska nodded his head. Depends, but sometimes you just get people like that. It's called playful banter. Openly questioning someone and insulting them is seen as a sign of friendship? Ash's face scrunched up in confusion. You have not misinterpreted my approach to Francis Draw. No, Ash. Ritska sighed, shaking his head. You have left little to the imagination with how you view Drake. I don't think there's anything in your relationship that could be described as friendly at all. He paused, although you have seemed a little more cordial as of late. We have since come to an understanding. Ash replied, my own feelings would jeopardize the situation, so I am working to simply bury them. However, I have made it clear to Drake that I tolerate her because of our mutual goals and he paused, I do not know how she views me, and I cannot find it within myself to care. That seems a bit cold. It is the best I can manage. Ash admitted, I have never encountered a person such as her. I have explained my personal grievances to her already, they are simply incompatible with my way of life and I cannot understand how she can ascribe to such a doctrine. Well, Ritsuka blinked, then slowly nodded his head, as long as you don't start another fight with her, also try not to start a fight with any other servants we encounter who might be like Drake. Ash's expression became troubled, you think we might encounter more of them? Maybe. I don't know. Ritsuka shrugged, you get all sorts of different people, so you can never tell. I see. Ash looked down, his troubled expression only intensifying as he thought more of the topic. He had imagined that Drake was at the extreme end, given how David, Boudica and Archer had been. Despite Boudica's own admittance of her enjoyment of savagery, she did show some regret over the manner in which she had displayed herself. Drake showed no such repentance for her own behavior. The idea there could be others who maintained a similar line of thinking and lived only for their own desires was not something he could fully understand. I will attempt to be cordial with them. He eventually voiced out, his features ironing out and giving a single nod to the master, those who we might encounter in the future. Should our goals align, I will try to overlook them for the sake of the mission at hand. Turning around, the saber looked over his shoulder towards Drake. If you will excuse me, I believe I will need to provide power for the ship. I'll come with you. David broke away from his conversation with Romani to speak with Ash, then cracked a mischievous smirk, I need to be a very useful compass. That doesn't change the fact it's technically your fault we're in this mess. Romani shouted out to the man as he walked away, it's your noble phantasm that you summoned. Or did the noble phantasm summon me? David Riley retorted, looking over his shoulder and giving a smug smile before he turned away and continued to walk alongside Ash. That isn't how it works. I think. Romani trailed off, the man sounding more unsure of himself. Unless it worked as a catalyst summon. But that would mean the Ark was brought here by the Grail. It's here now. Olga interrupted, discussions as to its origins can wait until we are not in dire straits. For now, focus on locating the Ark of the Covenant and ensuring it is protected. Anything else relating to how to defend it can wait until we actually arrive at its location. The woman paused for a few moments, it is also safe to assume that the Argonauts also have a way of tracking you. Wait, really? Ritsuka jolted, how? Because the caster is Medea, who was taught magecraft by Circe. Olga replied as if that explained everything, the magecraft that those from the age of gods practiced outclasses modern magi exponentially, she likely has ways of tracking you that we cannot account for. Not to mention that you are a boat full of servants, 2 goddesses and a holder of the Holy Grail. Tracking down your location would be almost child's play for one of her caliber. Ritsuka's mouth snapped shut, his attention turned towards Mash. The shielder nodded her head in support of the director, unfortunately, that is most likely true senpai, and if they apparently already aware of the Ark of the Covenant to begin with. Then they were probably looking for it anyway. Ritsuka realized with a nod, fair enough, so it's a race against the clock then is it? He paused, cupping his chin, we could probably do with defending it. He snapped his fingers and looked at his communicator, Romani, can you contact the servants and find out who has the best knowledge of defensible tactics, we'll try and set up some kind of barricade when the Argonauts arrive. I'll ask around. Romani replied back, considering who you're fighting, it probably won't amount to much though, but it is better than nothing. I'm not exactly expecting to stop Heracles in his tracks. Ritsuka replied with a wry expression, the boy scratched his cheek, it's more for the other servants that aren't, you know. Heracles. Fair enough. Romani admitted, I'll get on that. The line went dead, Ritsuka exhaled and placed his hands on his hips. He remained silent for a few moments before he blinked and looked to Mash, how come we've been calling him Heracles instead of Hercules? Hercules is the name the Romans call him, senpai. Mash dutifully explained, Heracles is the name he was granted in an attempt to pacify the goddess Hera because she disliked his birth and how Zeus had been unfaithful to her. His birth name was actually Alcetus. Really? Ritsuka blinked. I didn't know that. It is not that well known, senpai. Mash attempted to console him. The Hercules version of his name was the one used by the Romans and with the Roman Empire spreading across much of Europe. Hercules as the spelling was the one most used. Ritsuka nodded his head. Huh, more you know. Ash paused as he continued to walk towards the upper deck. The saber remained stationary for a few moments before he turned and looked down to the right and stared at the figure daintily sitting against the railings. Euryale stared back with a blank expression for several moments before she raised an eyebrow. Is there something you need? She paused before a coy smile came to her lips. Or have you finally come to recognize my true beauty? You have my condolences for the loss of Asterios. Ash cut her off. Her expression froze before it flattened out. However, he died in defense of you. I am certain he was content at the end. HMPH. Euryale huffed, shaking her head. He wasn't content or happy because he was protecting me. It was because I didn't treat him like a monster. Anyone could have done that. It just so happened to be me at the time. She leaned back, but he certainly made his exit memorable. Crying out his love for me like that and I don't even get the opportunity to tease him for it. That really was unfair of him. That was all I had to say. Ash nodded back, turning away from her and moving towards the stairs. And how does his death make you feel? She asked. Ash paused in his movements and looked back. I noticed, you seemed surprised as to how he looked and even made a rather bold comment to his face about it. I was surprised he looked so human. Because he was monstrous. She pressured. If he had tusks and fangs, would you have been less surprised? Yes. Ash nodded his head. Most things I encountered with a similar appearance to him were less human-like in shape. I had never encountered someone like him. Did that bother you? Euryale squinted her eyes. How human he looked? Why should I be concerned? I might look human as well, but that does not mean I am human. The girl frowned. You're undead, surely that does not change your origins. I am unkindled. Ash shook his head. The ashes of a human who was risen into their original shape. That does not change that I am nothing more than ash in the shape of a person. Really? Euryale raised an eyebrow. I suppose someone could argue you were as monstrous as Asterios then. They could call me whatever pleased them. Ash shrugged. It does not matter. Exhaling, he turned away. As for how Asterios' death makes me feel, we have lost an ally, however he died defending his purpose. There is nothing to mourn. Rather cold of you, isn't it? She wondered aloud. Would you rather he be here? Would you? He turned back to her. He was your guardian, not mine. He found purpose in devoting himself to your protection. He found acceptance in protecting me. She corrected, just as he found acceptance in everyone else. A monster spurned by humans and suddenly they speak to him so casually. He got what he wanted all his life, and it barely lasted a few days before he died. She gave a bitter smile, but that is life, is it not? Always giving you something just to take it away. Is that? Does Gwyndolin know you effectively killed his sister? What? Gwyndolin, you know him, don't you? She asked, tilting her head. I mean Philionor. His older sister, when you awoke her. You can shift the sentence all you wish, but you still killed her at the end of the day. He is not aware of the events of the Ringed City. I see. She nodded her head, then looked away. Just curious is all. We spoke and he told me about her. Ash stared at her in silence. But I suppose you don't care all that much, do you? Euryale realized, you're terrible for conversation and terrible to try and pick on. You have no reaction to anything I do or say, but Drake is different, isn't she? You're a god. Ash bluntly replied, your race is not beholden to the same ideals as humans. Euryale shifted her expression to a pleasant smile. So you write off my behavior as that of a goddess and can accept it? Yes. He nodded his head. It might not mean I like it, but I accept that your way of thinking and my way of thinking are different. It is part of why I hate Gwyndolin but will not attempt to correct him. He is what he is just as I am what I am. Well, that got boring fast. Euryale sighed, waving her hand. You can go do whatever you want to do. But thank you for recognizing Asterios' efforts. I'm sure he would have appreciated it. I know he liked you and your friends. Friends. Ash blinked at her, then stared at the others on the ship before frowning. We aren't friends. Euryale's bored expression made a complete 180 into intrigued. Oh. She leaned forwards. Surely you're friends. I've seen how much you speak with your master and the other servants. That puts me on cordial terms with them, that does not make us friends. He shook his head, looking past her. There has been only one I called a friend and I would prefer none end up as him. Oh, so you feel like being friends with someone will get them killed? It will distract me from seeing my own duty clearly. Ash stoically replied, if I were friends with them, I would. He cut himself off, tightening his expression and turning away. It does not matter. He abruptly turned away while Euryale continued to stare at his departing form. Not friends with anyone, She leaned back and chuckled. I wonder Asterios, were we really the most inhuman ones on the ship? Ritska heard the thumping footsteps close in behind him and he could already tell who it was who was closing in on him. He wasn't entirely sure what it was about, but he could tell this was going to be a tense conversation. He turned around and found himself staring up at the familiar stone visage of the bishop. Havel. Ritska nodded to him, doing his best to keep his expression composed. Is there something I can help you with? Havel stared at him in silence, then looked above his head and walked past him to the railings of the ship, eventually coming to a halt next to the master and staring out across the sea. The two remained silent before Havel eventually spoke out. I'm going to kill sorcerer. Medea. Havel nodded once, turning to Ritska. Lem. No. He shook his head. No problem, we need to beat them and that unfortunately means we likely have to kill them. He exhaled, do it quick. Havel stared down at him. Quick. Yeah, don't try and drag it out or something. Ritska sighed, leaning against the railings and exhaling. I'm having to try and tell someone to not torture people, what is my life anymore? The master gave an empty chuckle, it's weird. I saw her. She looked like a little girl around my age or maybe younger and I'm just asking you to kill her quickly. Havel stared at him in silence, then looked away. Is a sorcerer. He replied as if it was the only justification he needed. She will try and kill us all. Raising a hand, Havel gestured behind him in the direction of David, doing something with divine box. Ark of the Covenant. Ritska corrected, and yes. I know they're going to do something with it and it won't be good but I can't help but wonder if we really have to kill these people. I know we're going to but it just, never mind. He dismissed, waving his hand, forget it. You're, child. If this is about to be some, man up, speech. No, Havel turned to him, still, child, never, trained, for, this. The helmet stared down at Ritska, never, trained, for, killing, never, killed. The berserker shook his head. Make, for, bad, war. You're. Yeah, Ritska nodded, probably. But, you're, good, boy. He gave him a nod. Would, make, terrible, sorcerer. Ritska snorted, shaking his head. I think the director would agree with you on that one. She keeps going on about how third-rate I am. Good. Havel grunted. Girl, is, enemy, will, consider, quick, death. He shrugged, best. I will manage. Right, Ritska sighed, nodding his head, at least you will consider it. But, will, kill, her. Havel grunted, bad, feeling, she's, good, sorcerer. And a good sorcerer isn't a good person. Ritska guessed. Getting a blank stare in response, sorry. So, you have a bad instinct about Medea then? Yes. Havel grunted, nodding his head, need, to, kill, her, fast, not, just, because, of her, nature, as, sorcerer. All right. Ritska nodded his head, we'll keep an eye on her, but Heracles, Canis and Rendel are our priority to defeat first. Havel nodded his head, fine. Ritska figured that was as close as he was going to get so decided to leave it at that, instead turning to stare back across the water. Ash continued to point Storm Ruler towards he sails as David stood just behind him while Drake steered the ship. The one which puzzled him the most was the presence of the rider. So, Boudica coughed into her hand, earning her the attention of 3 sets of eyes. What do you normally do to pass the time? Drink, nothing, pray. The 3 answered at the same time, the other 2 stared at Ash with equally unsurprised looks. Nothing. Drake sighed. So you just, sit in silence? Yes. He nodded his head in affirmation, then looked to Boudica. Why do you ask? I was curious. I figured that with recent events, her expression became more downcast, and the loss of some of our allies, it might be best to try and distract our minds from the situation at hand. I don't see the need. Ash shrugged, but as long as it does not interfere, I will make no attempt to object. That's good. Boudica replied in a strained tone. What about stories? She looked around. They're always good ways to pass the time, right? I have spoken of my exploits in passing, but usually as a way to explain how to defeat an opponent or how a weapon came into my possession. Ash tilted his head. You mean to tell one, for no reason other than to avoid thinking about the journey to the location of the Ark? Yes. The writer nodded her head. Sigward speaks about the time he lost his armor. Ah, yes. Ash nodded his head, his lip twitching. Most amusing. I use that as an example as to why sleep is a poor idea for unkindled. Our kind does not need rest, so he could easily have been mistaken for a corpse. Drake blinked. Does he like sleep? I believe he enjoys it, yes. Ash nodded his head. I would have issues, but he was able to complete his duty with his peculiarities, so I have no problems with it, except for the theft of his armor. That was unfortunate and somewhat careless of him. Sounds like it. Drake shrugged, still steering the ship, picked a poor place to make camp and take it off then. What? Ash looked at her. No, he sleeps in his armor. David snorted. He got robbed of his armor while he slept. The king shook his head. Dear me. He must be quite the heavy sleeper then. Was he drunk or something? I do not believe so. Ash frowned. However, that might be an attempt to further save face. Although his supply of Siegbräu seemed short and he only drank it in my presence after a particularly challenging foe. He then paused. Alternatively, he once served it when he invited me to consume Estus soup with him once. Sounds nice. David nodded his head. A good friend then. We are on friendly terms, but I would not consider myself his friend. Ash dismissed, but he is a good man in any event. All right then. Boudica frowned, but he seemed to consider you his friend. Ash stared at her with a blank expression. I know. He called me his friend before he died. Drake craned her head to stare at the back of Ash's head with a frown, then peered over his shoulder towards Boudica before giving a shrug and going back to steering the ship. And you don't consider him a friend because... His death would affect me more. Ash replied, and... Fucking hell. Drake grumbled under her breath, shaking her head. You'd feel bad that he died, wouldn't you? Fucking... The woman scowled. Never mind. That isn't right. Boudica pointed out, you can't deny friendship with people because you will be sad when they pass. That would deny you friendship with anyone. She pointed to him. How do you think Ritska would feel if you were to die? When? Boudica blinked at him. Excuse me. When I die. Ash corrected her. I will die inevitably. I cannot stop him from viewing me as a friend, but I would prefer he did not, if only to spare himself pain. He frowned. Besides, there is no reason to view me as a friend to begin with. I am only here to fulfill my duty as a servant. That's wrong. Boudica replied with a stern voice. That's just wrong. But, wrong. She cut him off, shaking her head and placing her hands on her hips. Is that what you're like? You get hurt once and decide no more? When you got stabbed, did you decide to just give up? That is different. How? Because I can heal stab wounds. Ash looked away, staring straight ahead. It did not matter how many times I died or was crippled. I could heal myself or kill myself to restore my body at the nearest bonfire. I would always be whole but... Oh. Boudica stared at him, her hands lowering from her hips. Never figured out how to heal a broken heart, did you? Can you? He looked towards her with a faint glimmer of hope in his eyes. Is there a way to? No. Boudica shook her head. It won't stop and it doesn't matter what you do. Ash's expression flattened and the glimmer faded. Then I will not do so again. It was I did not like that pain. His left hand tightened into a fist, and I do not want to feel it again. Denying yourself the opportunity that friendships bring is only going to hurt you more. Boudica sighed. You can't do that to yourself forever. I only need to do it for so long as my duty lasts, Ash pointed out. Boudica's expression only seemed to worsen into one mixed between somberness and annoyance. The woman opened her mouth to reply before David cut her off politely. You shouldn't try to exist like that. The man shrugged, have a little fun, but I suppose if that's how you want to live, then that's how you want to live. He leaned back, living your whole life being told what to do and just doing it, isn't really something that should be. He looked back at Ash. You have no freedom. Ash remained silent. No freedom. He parroted back with a puzzled voice. Then paused. He lowered his sword and squinted his eyes ahead of him. Moving his left hand to his bottomless box, he flipped the lid open and then retrieved a pair of small metallic binoculars. Boudica blinked at the sudden revelation. How long have you had those? Since I first stepped foot on the high wall of Lothric. I found them on a corpse. Ash replied, leaning his sword against the wooden railing in front of him and holding the binoculars to his eyes. I can see an island ahead. The fuck are binoculars? Drake blinked, then Ash handed them to her. What am I supposed to do with those shit? The woman exclaimed, lowering them from her eyes and then looking back through them. Everything is so big now. Whoa. Ash stared at her with a blank expression while Boudica and David giggled at her sudden childish impression. Reaching out, the unkindled grabbed her arms and steadied her hands before he turned her towards the direction he'd seen the island in. Oh wait, yeah, I see it now. She lowered them from her eyes and turned to Ash with a wide smile. Hey, can I keep these? No. Ash denied instantly, taking them from her hands, also ignoring her pouting expression, and turning to David, holding them out to him. Is that the island we seek? David took the binoculars and then looked through them. Ash rested his left arm on the railings and leaned on them as the king stared out across the horizon. David hummed, could be. I'm sensing the link in that direction, but these waters change so swiftly, it might not be the right island. He lowered the binoculars and bobbed his head from side to side in thought. She would have already contacted us if that were the. He was cut off by a thud as an arrow buried itself into the wood just barely an inch from Ash's hand. The unkindled stared at it, and then looked towards the small note attached on the end of it. He reached out and took the note. You know you were like an inch from that going through you, right? Drake pointed out. You not that worried? I've been shot with arrows 3 times that size. Ash dismissed as he unfurled the note. It would not have been that painful. Besides, they missed. He commented as he looked at the note for a few moments. What does it say? Ash wordlessly handed it off to David. That bad? Drake frowned. No. Ash shook his head. I remembered that I cannot read. So why did you pick up the note? Drake stared at him in confusion. Never mind. She turned to David. What does it say? Well. David coughed into his hand, lowering the note and smiling. Good news. It's the right island. Hey, we heard a thunk, so I was wondering what. A voice came from below. The servants looked over the balcony to see Ritska staring up at them with a perturbed expression directed at the arrow buried in the wood next to Ash. Did someone shoot at us? It was my friend passing along a message. David held up the note, smiling widely. We've spotted the island up ahead. So we're close to the ark then. Ritska gave a relieved smile. Good news. The smile turned more humorous. Then let's get ready to raid this lost ark. Quote, comma, quote. Quote, comma, quote. Quote, comma, quote. Quote, comma, quote. Quote, dot, dot, dot. You know theft is a sin, right? Romani's laughter echoed through the communicator. And humor is underappreciated. Anyway, a little reveal chapter. Couple more conversations and whatnot, and Ash casually reveals he has 10 noble phantasms of a rank. And yes, the dragon tablet is one of them. Although it is obviously less impressive than Sieg, but it's the thought that counts. Anyway, means next chapter is likely going to be another fighting chapter. Which means we're into the final few chapters of this singularity. If I were to hazard a guess, I'd say 4 maximum left, but don't quote me on that.